Thank you, everyone, for listening to Soul Talk with host Jeremy McDonald, the author of Peace Be Still. You can check out more about our shows or about Jeremy at soultalkradio.org and jeremymcdonald.net. And now for our show.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for listening to Soul Talk. I am very excited for this show today, and our guest today, her name is Alice Karlsdóttir, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly.
Yes.
I had to ask her a couple weeks ago how to pronounce it. She is the author of the book Norse Goddess Magic, Trancework, Mythology, and Ritual, and I think that when we delve into this topic, I think everybody's just going to really enjoy it, and we're going to learn a lot, not just about the subject, but I really feel like as I've been reading it, I've actually been learning quite a bit about myself. And so especially when she talks about trans work and stuff. But Alice, thank you for being on the show, and I hope you're having a great day, and welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I was just reading over some of the stuff in just, doing some study just on you as well and reading your bio and stuff. This is a process of 40 years of work. Am I understanding that correctly, that you've been working on this study for a while?
I've been doing, not tranceworking per se, but I have been involved in Norse paganism and Norse mythology since I was in college.
Wonderful. I have a really good friend. I have a really good friend he's in his 20s now, but when he was been studying since he was in his teens and made his own rune stones, and I know he's going to love listening to the show. So I told him about it, and he was super excited. So I just wanted to kind of dive in really quick, because you actually used the trance work, and I think we'll go into more details about trance work here in a little bit, but you used this because you wanted to delve into the goddesses, the Norse goddesses, but there wasn't a lot of, if I understand correctly, a lot of writing about them. There was, but there wasn't. You wanted to flesh out more of the understanding of goddesses. And I think it's really important. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that in the Norse pantheon, there's quite a bit about Freya and not so much about Frigg, and then a lot of the others, there's just a little bit of information or even just a name and a quality or two, so not a lot to go on.
Well, it's interesting to me, and this is something that I learned, and this is, I'm going to throw it out there that, this is not, before the show I told you that this is not my strong point of study, but I'm very interested. And I actually thought Freya was Odin's wife, actually. I did not know until I read your book that Frigg was his wife. And so am I understanding that correctly, or is that different, the legend?
Yes, legend? That's true. Freya, there's not anything that outright says Freya and Odin had a relationship. There is some kind of, you could make the supposition that they had something on the side, but she's not his wife, Frigg is. Freya is probably the best known Norse goddess, so people may make that extrapolation that the two best known god and goddesses would be paired, but that's not the case.
That's not the case. It's just more of an assumption in some ways because of the amount of writing that's about her.
Yes, I think things get confused because Wagner wrote the Ring of the Nibelungs, the opera cycle, which involves those god figures, but he presents them in a different way than they actually appear in the mythology. And then you have Thor comic books, which has kind of its own storyline and mythology, which takes some things from the mythology, but it's also very different. So unless you've actually read the myths, you might have picked up ideas from other places.
Yeah, from stories that are not actual historical stories and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes total sense. So when we're talking about trans work, and I of course studied a lot of things as far as trans work, and I very much relate to some of the things that you talk about in here when you are talking about the difficulty that the work to get there, and you even talk about a tense body and stuff like that, and the work it takes to actually get into that trance state. how long did it take you in your practice to be able to get to that place where, you're able to go into a good trance?
Well, I started out actually not being very good at all going into trances. I would go to pagan gatherings or various things where someone would lead a trance working and other people, would be having a really successful experience, and I wouldn't even be able to get, really into a trance. And I kind of thought it was one of those things that you were either had a talent for or you didn't. So I kind of didn't worry about it a lot until I became involved with this a working ritual group that used the Norse gods and tradition, and the leader of that group liked to use a god and goddess together in a lot of the workings. But as I just said, there isn't a lot of information on the goddesses written down, and I kind of wound up being the person in charge of writing the invocations and the parts for the goddess. So I was just driven to learning to do trance work because I just needed another source of information. And it also seems to me, we talk about, traditional mythology and things from books, which is important when you have that information, but somebody somewhere got that information, originally from some other place than a book. And so, I believe that there are other ways to supplement that, and even if you have a lot of information, that you should explore left brain, as if you would, activities to find it out. So I started trying to learn to go into trance, and the other thing that drove me to do that is I'm an actor. I do acting, and I was at a workshop at a class that was given by a hypnotist in New York, and he did some exercises on people, and at various points, different people would kind of be in a hypnotic state. And he kind of concluded, like, as he went on, more and more people were affected. And his premise was that there were a number of levels of hypnosis and that everyone could be hypnotized, but some people it took more steps than others. So that kind of encouraged me to try trance working again, because before I thought it was something I couldn't do, but after hearing that, I thought maybe it just takes me longer to go into a trance than other people. And I studied, I tried to read some information on self-hypnosis and on other tranceworking or tranceworking type things from other traditions. And I really kind of did it like an experiment. I used to keep a notebook almost like they make you do in high school, where I'd write down all kinds of things like the weather conditions and my physical condition and the time of day and the time of month, what the cycle of the moon was, and things like that, just to find out, if there were factors that caused it to work better at some times than others. And after trying various, methods, I kind of came up with a set of things that worked for me, and then once I settled into that, so that was probably in I'd say like the early to mid-'80s by the time I really feel like I got it nailed down pretty well. But I started doing it like in the late 70s, so it took me, 5 or 6 or 7 years
to
get
cool.
the procedure down.
And the reason why I asked that question, because I know a lot of people say, well, I don't know if I can get to that. I don't know if I can quiet my mind. And you're right here saying that, maybe sometimes it's easier for some people, but sometimes it takes, some practice.
Exactly.
And
I almost feel like that because I can't do it well, that it's actually easier for me to try to help other people learn how to do it, because if you already know how to do something, you don't really have to think about how you get into that state if it's easy for you. But if it's hard for you, you have to kind of to pay more attention to what you're doing, when you finally achieve it.
Yeah, you're able to relate to what they're going through and teach them, based on your experience. So
the other thing I realized. Oh, I was just going to say, the other thing I realized is that trance working, I kind of thought of things like, these lunar activities like divination and trance working and things like that as being something, again, that you either had a talent for or not. But I also learned that it's not only something that you can learn, but it's something you can get better at with practice, just like a sport or playing a musical instrument. That, like, the more I did it, like now I actually feel like I'm much better at doing trance working than I was 20 years ago. Or 30 years ago when I was first doing it.
That totally makes sense. I think when I first started just being able to meditate, just talking about that, just meditating, I would do it for like 2 minutes, and then I'd already be like turning on the TV. Because my mind was so active.
Yeah. Do you ever a lot of times when I do like spiritual or psychic things like that, my mind will start thinking, like it'll think about the process of meditation. It's like it's trying to trick me into thinking it's doing the activity, but it's really still not quiet, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally understand that. So you actually bring up a really good subject here, because and I just highlighted this in your book. A lot of people, especially in the I even find it in pagan communities where I've spoken at gatherings and stuff like that, and I find them actually kind of putting down rituals, which I found actually kind of surprising. And you actually come right out and say here in your book, and I really enjoyed this, you say mythology and god forms also provide a valuable emotional link with what might otherwise be seen as a set abstract concepts. Effective magic and ritual is dependent on a certain level of emotional energy as well as thought and will. And you go on to say it's very hard to get emotionally worked up about an abstraction or symbol, whereas it's very easy to feel affection and kinship for a red-headed god who rides a goat-driven chariot. And I thought that was very powerful. And it even goes into your journey.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying that your journey, you actually talk about in one of your trance work journeyings that, you went in to visit Frigg, and you went to her home, and there was a loving where she's brushing your hair, and there's a lot of emotion that's going. You could feel this comfort and love during this experience for you. And, if you hadn't prepared yourself, you might not have had that same experience.
Yeah, I think I do, at least I personally do a lot better if I do some preparatory work. Kind of think of it as priming the pump. It's kind of like when you used to go to school and a teacher would say, write an essay about anything. It was almost harder to write about anything than if she gave you some sort of topic like what you did over the summer or something. So it's kind of very hard to say, well, I'm just going to go into a trance and see what happens. And it's better, like, if you kind of think, well, I would like to, maybe encounter this god or goddess and maybe read something about them, so that your mind kind of has some images that it can start playing with, so that when you actually do make contact, like you're able to kind of cross that link to the world of the gods, as it were. I do believe, like, gods and goddesses are real. I don't believe they're, exactly the way I picture them or anyone else, because they're not human beings. I don't really believe they're like someone sitting in a throne, up in the sky or something. But I think we tend to anthropomorphize deities because it makes them make sense to us. It's kind of a way we can understand them, and that the gods can communicate with us through this kind of mutually acceptable symbology that humans can relate to and understand at this point in our development.
Well, and it makes a lot of sense, too, because they meet us in a place where we can comprehend and understand. And, even when we talk about, a shamanic state or a shamanic dream or journey, it's similar in a sense, because they talk to the spirits in those experiences, and however way that comes out, the wisdom still comes out, and they're able to take that out and experience that or teach that. Or
yes, there's a lot of similar types of workings in various other cultures and traditions and fields of magic that seem similar to what I'm doing. Some of them might be exactly what I'm doing, and some might be slightly different, but they all, seem to achieve that sort of goal.
So out of all of your workings with this, where did you, you journeyed to different deities and gained wisdom from each one of them. What was your most, I guess, life-changing for you out of all the experiences that you went to?
Whoa, life-changing. That's That's hard. I mean, I think I had a feeling or kind of a connection with Frigg before I started it. So probably the workings I had with her, I've had more frequent workings with her. If you want to go into life-changing, I actually did some trance workings to Loki, who is not a goddess, and that's not talked of in this book. But those are probably the most, the times that I really, like, learned something that kind of, like, was an aha moment or something I hadn't thought of before. But that's kind of what that particular deity does, so.
Yeah, he makes you face your shadow or darkness or
yeah,
you don't want to look at.
Like with most of the gods I work with, like I usually kind of think, well, you know, I have a purpose when you can just go to do a trance to practice it or just to experience the state, but it seems to work better if you just kind of have an idea where you're going. It's kind of like the difference between thinking, I think I'll drive over to Joe's house, or I think I'll just drive around aimlessly, you know. And sometimes I'll have in mind, you know, well, I want to learn something about the goddess air, or I want to, you know, maybe I'm having this problem, I'd like, you know, some insight into that. But like with the Loki trances, whatever, like I might have had something in my mind, but very often what he would say or do to me would be on a totally different topic, which was often what I really should have been worried about instead of what I thought I should be worried about. But sometimes when I do a trance, I would mainly just see the goddess doing things, interacting with me or other people or beings, and it would teach me something about her essence or what she was. And other times they would actually, you know, give me insight or advice into some personal problem I was having. I guess it kind of depended if I needed advice at that particular point or not. I will say a lot of the things I would get into trance, I mean, some things I think were just meant for me, you know, personally, so I didn't necessarily include that in the book. Because I think that's an important thing to remember, that sometimes what you see in a trance is not, like, meant for everyone in the world. It's just, like, meant for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's for your own personal journey.
Yeah.
You know, you actually bring up, and I used this actually on the image for the shell that I pulled out of your book. It says tranceworking is not meant to to be a replacement for all the historical, literary, and archaeological evidence available to us, and you should certainly not fall into the trap of deciding that any pet whim you imagine in trance is more valid than something written in a book. And I thought that was very interesting because it's a very grounded statement, and to say that, you know, we also want to look at, you know, other people's work that they've done up to this point and use that to make, this is how I took it, is to use as a discernment for your own work. Because
this is very subjective work, and that I write in the book, other things can influence your trance. Like if I was watching a really exciting movie or reading a book or something had happened to me that day, sometimes those images would kind of leak into my trance. And I think in traditional cultures where this sort of practice is, you know, accepted and part of, you know, the social structure, there would be a shaman or a wise woman or an elder that you could go to and say, you know, I had this dream or trance, and they would say, well, this is what that means, but we don't really have that as much, you know, that established. It's kind of been broken in modern society. So most of us don't have anyone we could go to and say, you know, is this just my own private crap or is this important, you know? So you kind of have to do that for yourself. And I didn't mean by that statement, because I noticed some comments to that excerpt on your page, you know, seemed to take it that I was saying things in books are more important than personal workings. And I wasn't saying that. It was just, I mean, you shouldn't believe everything you see in a book either. You know, you should have discernment about that. And you also need to have discernment about, like, because they're kind of like dreams almost, you know, that there's images in it that some mean something and some are like, you know, your individual thing. It helps if you, sometimes before I do a trance, I keep a journal, so I try to write down, like, what I've been doing the past day or week, so that I can, like, sometimes I'll have images in a trance, and I look back in my journal, and I realize that might have come from a movie I saw over the weekend. So just kind of be aware of what things you're doing that might, be influencing your trance. Maybe if you do trance working over time, you can see like what images repeat. If things keep coming up every time, that would tend to indicate it was more important or more real. And if you know other people that are working this way, I've had people, now over the years that have had the same image in a trance about the same goddess that I have. So that to me is, not before I wrote the book. So it's not like they read what I wrote, but it's like they independently saw something very similar to what I saw, which is kind of exciting because that would indicate that really was something true about that goddess for more than just one person.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually how you just explained it, because I'd read your book, and one of the things you had mentioned even is that going through texts, you use discernment in that as well, and of course some of the comments on my page are from people that have experienced massive near-death experiences, and so a lot of their work is in that kind of experience, and it's very valid work as well. And so I could see how they could see that as that wasn't your intention in the book. I just thought it was I actually enjoyed it because it said to me, let's take all information and all things that we get and process through it and make a logical or an educated decision for ourselves, or hypothesis.
And some of what I think, some things I used to think I thought, or knew, have changed over the years because I got new data, as it were, and I've kind of thrown out some ideas that I used to have about some goddesses, and that was kind of the point of doing the trance working, was to kind of learn more about them. So you kind of have to be willing to be wrong.
Absolutely, and I think that's a part of the journey. I mean, my upbringing was very dogmatic Christian, so as I study and process over the last 18 years of study, I realized that there's new things to shed away. And not saying I have nothing against Christianity. I'm just talking about the way I was raised.
Right.
And so those ideas peel away, and I look at them differently as opposed to how I saw them when I was 18 years old.
Right. Yeah. So I think even if you'd stayed a Christian, you would probably still think about some things differently than you did when you were 18. I think it's kind of like some ideas in quantum physics, that you have a past, you have a worldview, and even if you reject things you were brought up with, they still are part of you. So, like when you're looking at a goddess or something, it's like you can't help but change, what you see based, because of who you are up to that point, that you're going to bring who you are into what you're investigating, whether you intend to or not.
Absolutely.
The other reason I wrote that excerpt, when I started out doing this, the pagan, especially the Norse community, was very, they just took things from, that they had found in books, because there's a lot of original lore on the Norse gods, not just people today writing books. So there's actually myths from long ago, which are especially valid because those were written by people who still kind of believed in this, from their, childhood. And that's all they use. They were kind of suspicious of witchy things like, trance working or whatever. And another reason I wrote the book is kind of to try to, let people know, there are other ways you could be working with this. But now it kind of seems like some of the people I talk to, it's almost swung the other way to where a lot of people are doing trance working and dream work, and they almost give that more substance than things that you could find in an ancient text. And if if one person has a different vision of a god than another, I've seen people get in disagreements. You start thinking like this. I saw him looking at trance last night, and this is exactly the way he is, and your way is wrong. And it's like you can't let your own work be, you can't believe that every single thing that you come across in a trance is true, and that other people that see different things are necessarily wrong. You have to use a little objectivity, and like you said, to process it. And I think people. Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was just I've been actually pondering that a lot lately, because I've been just putting, on things on social media, and of course, I do a radio show and I write a blog and all that kind of stuff. And so, what I find is that I'm writing from my experience and what I've seen in my study, and I found there are certain people that, like you and I, are having a very solid discussion, and I found that when there are some people, exactly like you say, they have to kind of put out the way my experience, and it kind of seems like they have to do it to make themselves feel better. I don't know if that's about their own. I don't know if that's always the case, but
maybe if you have a really powerful experience, you really believe that is, I am the one that has this special connection with this God, but which you may, it's not saying that that's not valid. I think, too, there's one particular goddess, Syn, S-Y-N, not Christian Sin, but I saw her as kind of a large country woman, and she had a country Texas accent in my trance. And like I said, I think the way we see beings in trance is, it's not the way they exactly are, but they're appearing a certain way that to try to let us know something about themselves. And I think, it's not like I think this Norse goddess has a Texas accent, because that would be silly. But I think, what the idea that was getting across to me was that this was kind of a down-to-earth, country woman type feeling. So if I had been born in England, I might have heard her with a Yorkshire accent. So I think sometimes people see things differently in trance just based on their personal experience. It's not like one person is connecting with this goddess and another person isn't, but maybe the goddess is appearing to them that way because it means something to them that the goddess wants to get across. And another person might not see them that way because they don't have that experience, and it wouldn't mean anything to them.
That makes a whole lot of sense, and because it's based on their experience, and I think that's the reason why spirituality and these paths for us are personal, and we as people that write books and put things out there, we share our experience, and not even that, just normal everyday people talking amongst their friends. We're having a discussion, and you just share your experience,
right?
And I think if we learn to come together and speak about our experiences, we'll find that we'll all grow from each other. And,
exactly.
Because I've found
like I said, I've met people that did a trance working to a goddess that I had worked with, and they would have some things different. Some of the things I thought, I've never seen that, and other things it's like, wow, I haven't seen that, but that's really interesting. I think, that tells me something. And sometimes they saw what I saw, and, it's like, wow, you saw the same thing I saw. That's kind of exciting, but I wouldn't know that if I weren't willing to listen to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to talk about the fact that each goddess you give a ritual that comes into it. That I'm finding as I'm reading through these. And it sets the intention or the setting for you to go into your trance work.
Yes, I do that. That's kind of, again, to prime the pump, if I set up the trance work, if I'm doing a trance working specifically because I want to contact a particular deity, I do a ritual, besides doing some research and thinking about it beforehand, then I do a ritual in which the trance is, encased in, as it were. To kind of, just to guide me, to guide my mind, is like, this is where we're going tonight, Every once in a while I've had other deities pop into a trance that I guess wanted to tell me something, but usually it does help me, that tonight I'm going to try to contact Eros. So I do the ritual to kind of maybe get her attention, to kind of let my subconscious, give it a hint as to where it's supposed to be going that night. And because I have a background in theater, theater and ritual are a lot alike, and I enjoy doing rituals. So I didn't know they had become unpopular in some circles, but I like to do them.
I've just heard it discussed, and of course, even when you go outside of the pagan community and get more into the metaphysical community, they try to poo-poo it. I'm like, no, we all have rituals. Trust me. When you wake up, put your clothes on, and brush your teeth every morning,
right.
That's a ritual. It may not be a ritual as what we're talking about here, but it's something you do every day to prepare yourself for the day. So
sure, and ritual is kind of just a way of structure, especially if it's a ritual. Like if you do rituals all the time, I have certain procedures, or certain things I do before I go into a trance, whether I do a full ritual to a goddess or not. And like I've done them now for so long that because it's hard for me, it's hard to go into a trance for a lot of people. And that's just another way that you're kind of telling your mind and your subconscious, we're now going to go into a trance. These are the things we do every time we go, and it kind of, just like when you go into a classroom, the teacher tells everyone to be quiet and sit down. It's like there's just things you do, and it's kind of telling your mind, now we're getting ready to do X. And it makes it easier just because those familiar things become part of your muscle memory or your mental memory. And when you get used to doing it, then it's easier for you to get your mind into a trance state because that's just what it expects to do. I will say, too, even if you don't do like a ritual to a goddess or these things, I really believe you should do something to set aside the space. You're doing something like a trance working in some kind of working, whatever tradition, or, if you do hammer working or smudging or carry fire around the circle or whatever you do, because you're kind of leaving yourself open when you do things like divination and trance. And you kind of want to protect yourself from outside influences, and not just go into a trance. Just do it and leave yourself kind of vulnerable.
Well, you talk about that too. You talk about actually practicing and being doing other rituals beforehand, and getting some experience before you start doing trance work. And prior.
It kind of requires a lot of. It requires a lot of concentration, kind of an extended concentration to do a trance. It's like if you think it's hard to meditate for 2 minutes, try to keep your attention for half an hour, while you're doing this trance. So it does help, like if you have never done any kind of things at all, to do some kind of, basic concentration or visualization exercises or meditation just to learn, to kind of how to quiet your mind, as you were saying earlier.
Well, I think you bring up a very good point to, do some type of ritual to get yourself into that place. I do a thing to the archangels all the time, and I have their paintings on my altar. And when I go to work with one of them, I also have on my altar. My mother was a shaman of the Mayan tradition, and so she taught me a lot of healing techniques before she passed away. And so I have a lot of stuff from her altar on my altar, because her energy or the thought of her relaxes me and gets me into.
And just that one object can bring back all kinds of memories about her for you.
Yep, absolutely.
When you see it.
And love texts me and everything else. So, I think that I think that you bring up a really good point when you talk about, we have to be prepared and getting our mind, into that state. So, what came? Actually, I want to bring up something that I find very interesting. I talked about it at the very beginning, but I guess it's we're talking. You were talking about in the book. We were talking about your journey to meet Frigg, and then you also talk about how she was not a jealous goddess, and then even at the beginning of the show, you talked about Freya, and it seems to be that she might have had, Odin had her as a lover, or potentially, it's vastly different than the Greeks, and Hera and jealousy and stuff like that. And before the show, we were talking about that a little bit. I think you brought up a really good point that I think it's important for people to understand, is that the Greek culture was different than the the Nordic culture as well. It was vastly different.
Yeah, I think, like you talk about individual experiences shape, how we see things, and I think culturally too. Like, I think one of the reasons there are different traditions or religions or pantheons is like kind of collectively as a culture, people have certain, ways of doing things, and they kind of, the way they picture their gods, kind of reflects that. So in the Greek culture, like, women were very restricted. They stayed indoors all the time. They didn't really intermingle with, go out that much or talk to other men. Like if they had those drinking symposiums, the women would be in another part of the house and not at the dinner party with, the strange men. And pretty much all they did was have children and weave, And so they have a very restricted life. So you can see if that was your wife, their wives probably tended to be jealous, because if you have nothing else to do with your time, if your husband and your family is your whole life, then that becomes very important to you. And if he's not, if he's spending his time and attention elsewhere, that would become like a very big deal, because that's all you have to concentrate your attention on, and that's kind of your status in your life. If you move into the Roman times, women had more freedom. It was still kind of, and then you get into the Norse culture, and it's pretty free. They could have women could ask for divorce. I mean, it was still a patriarchal culture, but women were generally consulted about whether they wanted to marry who you wanted them to marry. They could divorce. They could own property. They, would, be running the farm while the men were off biking in the summer. It's like they had a lot of things to do. So I think, and you see Frigg does, a lot of things. So, and they would advise their husbands. They'd come in and serve, the holy cup in the drinking ritual symbol instead of being, shut off in another part of the house. So they would have more things to occupy their time, and maybe they wouldn't focus all their time on wondering what their husband was or wasn't doing. And so I think Frigg is maybe more easygoing, because that was kind of the way, like really jealous, female figures tend to come up in a culture where their lives are very restricted, and based around just one man. Because, like, if you put a woman in that situation, then, of course, she's going to focus all her emotions and her thoughts on that one man. And if he's not faithful to her, she gets, jealous and angry,
Yeah, she gets hurt because her whole life is dedicated on that, and then
right, and that's all she has to think about.
And so she has nothing. Well, that makes a tremendous amount of sense, because when you even look at our modern culture, when there is a some of the spiritual counseling healing I do with people, I see the jealousy comes from a partner that is dedicated almost codependently their life to this person, but they have nothing else in their life. And it's really unhealthy in some ways. Well, it is unhealthy, and then the jealousy almost becomes controlling, because they want to. It does become controlling, and so that's a very interesting point where we could learn from ancient cultures.
You can see this with overprotective parents sometimes too. Like if you have devoted your whole life to your children, then as they grow up, it's nice to do that. But maybe if all your attention and your status is on your child, then you become overprotective, and it becomes important to you that your child does the things that you want them to, and it's hard to let them go.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And like I said at the beginning of the show, we could learn a lot about our own lives from your writings, because when you go into that, and you ponder that, where are we being in our lives? Jealous. Is it because we don't have enough to do, or we're not working on our own lives?
Maybe, yeah. Well, I was going even though the book deals with Norse goddesses in this case, although I do trances to gods too, that's because that's my tradition, and that's what I worked with. That's what I know about, and so I was using it kind of examples of what I was doing. But the technique, tranceworking technique, it's not meant just to contact those Norse goddesses. You could use the method with any tradition that you wanted. So I tried to be clear. I tried to put the things I saw in trance in like a different typeface, so that it's like, this is what I saw, but this is not necessarily what you have to see. So some people don't like to see what other people saw in a trance before they do it themselves, because they don't want to influence themselves. So you can not look at that if you don't want to.
I think it's interesting, and I there was something, I don't remember what part of the book it was in, where you talked about in your research, you actually even took Christian writings that were talking about pagan writings and used that as a way of processing through stuff. And I think even you mentioned here in a quote that you were talking about, this is again going back into discernment. So is it wise to find out when a given work was written by whom? Was it written by a genuine heathen, or was it written by a Christian? What sort of Christianity was practiced in the time and place? And, so you're talking about discernment here and processing through, information and to find
Well, it's like I was saying, we all bring our own, upbringing and worldview to everything we write. I will say that even some of these are old heathen myths that we read about. Like, by the time they were written down, they were almost always written by someone who was nominally a Christian, because the true pagan Norse culture wasn't really a literate one. They used runes for magical purposes and memorials, but they didn't just write stories with them. But the Christianity in Scandinavia, some people will, reject, say, Snorri Sturluson, who wrote one of the Eddas, an early text that is considered important by Germanic scholars, because he was as the Middle Ages, I guess. So he was nominally a Christian, but Scandinavian was Christianized so late that really, I think Sweden was one of the last countries to be Christianized, but they didn't get a bishop until the 16 or 1700s. So people might have, been baptized and said, well, you're a Christian now, but they might not really know anything much about Christianity for another century or two. So they were still very influenced by their pagan beliefs, maybe even more than someone like me who is a pagan, but I was raised in a modern, mostly Christian culture. And not just religion, but there were trends through the years, like in the late 1800s and early part of the 1900s, in the 1900s. No, not the 1800s, the 18th century. So the late 1900s, people were very into nature images. As it was kind of a scholarly trend. So if you read books from that period, they'll tend to compare every single god to some kind of natural force, the thunder, the wind, the moon, the sun. And some gods definitely, Thor is associated with thunder. That's pretty fundamental back to the earliest picture we have of him. But not every single god is necessarily, that's their function, is some kind of natural function. So if you read, you have to be aware that was what authors of that period were kind of into. If you get into the early 20th century, you'll start seeing psychological, interpretations of everything, because psychology had, been discovered. And, so even today, you can say whatever is, common, I tend to see images of quantum physics in things because, and I'm not a physicist, but I read some layman's books on that. But we're kind of into science now, and you kind of tend to see things in those terms. So you tend to see mythology and gods in terms of the influences of your time and place.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in our culture right now, especially with the theoretical physicists coming out and the quantum physicists and movies like What the Bleep come out, so they're going to make us start to think, and those that type of stuff, because that's what our mind or our images are. And of course, psychology would make tremendous sense with like somebody like Carl Jung coming out and saying that the last great medicine is imagination.
Right. And it's not to say that none of those things are true, but it's like you do tend to be maybe overly influenced by the dominant ideas of your period. So when you read books, like if you know when they wrote it, you kind of need to just be aware, that those were their influences.
Mm-hmm. I think that's why I found the statement so powerful, is that as I've done, this is now going on almost my fifth year doing this show, is that as I've read authors' books of different subjects and different things, I get a different perspective. But if I just stuck in my ideas of what I got through, my meditations or trance work and stuff like that, then I would be stuck in those ideas, and now I get to grow, with other people's experience.
You're lucky to do that. I was just talking with somebody the other day, like when we're in school, like when you're in school, you have to learn many different subjects, and there's always some you like better than others, some you're better at than others, but like even if you don't want to do algebra, you have to learn something about that too. And once you become an adult, you tend not so much, unless you come into a situation like yours where you encounter different things, but like you tend to kind of gravitate to, when you're on your own, to the things that you're interested in and that you want to do, and you don't read, other things as much, so it is a danger that, you kind of get shut off to influences of topics that you're not interested in or that you don't know about or that you're not working in. And it is kind of invigorating whenever I am reading, books in other areas than my subject specialties, that even if I'm not doing something that specialty, it'll often spark an idea just from reading something different.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So how do they, I've put in the description below websites that I found on the Inner Traditions website. Put your blog down below. And, of course, I put the Inner Traditions website. Is there another website that is out there that they can go to find you?
I have a Facebook page. I don't have a website yet. I'm still working on that.
Okay, so they just search your name up.
Difficulties this work. But, yeah, it's Alice Karlsdóttir on Facebook and the blog and the Inner Traditions website.
And then I'm assuming that we find the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the Inner Traditions website.
Yes, it should be out on the basic sites.
All the places where you get stuff.
All the places where you get books, right?
So
it's amazing. When I was coming up, you had to find the metaphysical bookstore that in your city or the nearest city and travel there to find books. And it's kind of nowadays that you can find almost anything you want from your bedroom.
Well, just in my local area here, in the Tampa Bay area, there's at least 12 metaphysical bookstores, and one that's just completely dedicated to pagan,
wow.
Pagan books and stuff like that. And she actually started about 10 years ago and is retired from Verizon and started her store there, and it's just thriving.
I'll have to check that out the next time I'm in Florida.
Yeah, I'll send you the email. I'll send you the information because I know she'd love for you to do a book signing or something.
Oh, cool.
But so I just wanted to we got about 10 more minutes left, and
okay.
I was just going to kind of cover some things that maybe we didn't talk about here in the last 50 minutes or so. Maybe I can hand it over to you a little bit, but I was just going to ask this one question. Out of all of this work is finding, discovering the goddesses and writing about them. I think I asked you something similar to this before, but what stood out to you? I mean, discovering the goddesses and, more things about them. what really like stood out to you and just said, wow, I didn't know that, or I never even thought of about that. I guess it's a different when asking you what's life shifting.
Yes. Some goddesses were more like the way I expected them to be, and others weren't. I guess, I mean, they often would have insight into my personal problems or situation that was surprising in its accuracy. The one goddess that probably surprised me is a goddess called Sjáfn, and pretty much what you know about her is that she's a love goddess, and I kind of had thought she would appear as more of a Venus figure or Freya, like sensual, sexual love, but she seemed to be broader than that, to be encompassing like all kinds of love between sisters and lovers and families and just love of people in general, you know. So that was kind of interesting, you know. It's kind of a not just, you know, not excluding sensual love, but encompassing a lot of different other types of love. And that maybe we restrict our minds, you know, when we hear something like a love goddess to just think about sex, maybe because our culture is so highly sex, but there are a lot of different types of love.
Absolutely. Well, and there's just love of individuals, love of people, you know, stuff to do, you know, love of plants and our earth and that kind of stuff. That's love of yourself. Yeah. So what, I guess I kind of want to hand over, you know, the next few minutes, anything that maybe we didn't cover throughout the show that maybe you'd want to talk about.
I think we really covered pretty much everything. Just, you know, again, to reiterate, like I believe in using both scholarship and metaphysical methods such as trance working or ritual working to work together to come to like an understanding of deities and of religious or magical practice. Because I think you can get too dry and scholarly, you know, on the one end, but you can kind of get too subjective and maybe off track if you only use the subjective end. But I'm not excluding one or the other. And just to encourage people to you know, to prepare yourself and you know, do some basic exercises, but don't be afraid to do your own work. You know, to learn the methods and do your own rituals and work, and not just depend on, you know, what other people have written in books. But you know, I think it's more accessible to more people than I had originally thought. I feel like if I could learn to do trance working, most people probably could, because I was really, really bad at it when I first started, and now I'm pretty good at it.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about that in the book. That's why I really enjoyed having you on, is because I know a lot of people that listen to the show have emailed me and said, how do I get there? And I'm always like, practice. And so there's a lot of traditions to teach you.
Well,
and here is
I just say I listed a lot of different methods. I don't use them all myself. Some of them are methods I've tried and wound up not using or that don't work for me, but other people really like them. And I think it's just a matter of experimenting, you know, with the different ways of going to a trance and finding a setup that works for you. You may not need to do as many things as I did, or you may need to do different things. But once you get, you know, a system that works for you, you can use it pretty reliably.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it doesn't always work. Like, you may be tired or it may be noisy or something. So if you don't get a good trance state, you know, the first time, don't, you know, feel like, oh, that didn't work, I won't do it anymore. But, you know, to keep trying, because I don't always get a good trance every single time, even now.
I'm sure that your day and everything else going on in your life can influence it.
Yes, it sure can.
So, Alice, thank you for coming on the show. I just want to put up, well, the only last question I have for you is, what's next? I noticed I'm on your Facebook, and it said you did a signing in San Francisco for the Intertraditions booth there. Is there anything else coming up that you'd like to bring up here on the show?
I don't have any book signing type things. I am doing another interview, which I don't know what day it is. I'm doing another interview in a couple of weeks. But I don't have that information handy. So I guess I won't tell you about that right now.
Well, you guys can go to her Facebook.
I don't have my paper. It's early in the morning. I don't have my notes together. And
you're fine.
I'm doing a play right now too, so I'm really tired.
Understandable. Well, you guys can find out more about Alice. Just go to her Facebook. You just look up Alice. All I did is type in her name, and it pulled right up. It's her, and then just like her page, and then you'll be able to get updates about what's going on with her and her work as well.
Here it is. I'm doing an interview for the Far Side internet radio show on July 30th at 1 p.m. Central Time. So.
Perfect. Well, and let me know, and I'll post it on mine as well. So.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Alice, it has been wonderful, and thanks for being on the show, and have a good production tonight. I guess you're in a play tonight.
Yes, I'm doing the Scottish play by Shakespeare. I'm playing a witch, ironically enough.
Well, that sounds fun. Well, everybody, thanks for listening. My next show is going to have Dr. Amit Goswami on, and that should be a great show as well. So, everybody, many blessings, and thanks for listening to Soul Talk. And Alice, have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.